The ballroom didn't fall silent. It froze. Right after Harlan Sutter said it. My son begged to marry this kid, but she's still an idiot. A pause, and then a wave of laughter rolled through the crowd. But it wasn't joyful. It was sharp. Cutting. Lucia didn't laugh. She stood there, bouquet trembling in her hands, her lips twitching like she wanted to smile, but couldn't quite find it. Evan, her groom, looked down at his shoes. I sat at the third table from the front, close enough to see Harlan's smirk as he passed the mic back to the DJ. No one stopped him. No one asked him to explain. They just laughed because he made it easy. I felt something ancient wake in my chest, something cold and tired. That same feeling I had years ago when Gerald's mother joked that I must have married her son for papers or pity. I had smiled then. I said nothing. I told myself it wasn't worth it. But Lucia isn't me. And I won't let her carry what I swallowed whole. Evan walked back to her side, said something I couldn't hear, and she nodded. She kept nodding for the next few minutes through the photo session, through the toast lineup. People offered her hugs and praise, but no one mentioned what had just been said. Maybe they hoped she'd forget. Maybe they thought if they didn't acknowledge it, it wouldn't leave a mark. But I saw how she held her arms tighter across her chest. I saw how she avoided looking at the head table. I saw her dim, and I stood, not to make a scene, not yet, but to move, to be ready. Because something in me knew this wedding was no longer just a celebration. It had shifted, and now it asked me to see clearly what was unfolding. I stayed close, but didn't hover. I watched Lucia push through each moment like it was a wave she had to outlast. But something told me this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The ceremony moved forward, but something had shifted. Even the music felt thinner, like it was playing through a cracked speaker. Lucia smiled for the camera, but it was the kind of smile you wear when your feet hurt and your heart's not in it. Evan didn't look at her much, and he didn't look at his father at all. I stayed seated during most of the reception, tucked at a corner table, with a line of fake greenery blocking half my view of the dance floor. It didn't matter. I wasn't there to dance. I was watching the spaces between people, the pauses, the way Evan leaned in to speak to Lucia and how she nodded like she was agreeing to disappear. What unsettled me most wasn't what had been said. It was what wasn't. Evan hadn't confronted his father. Not then, not after. He'd offered no apology, no defense. Only quiet comfort, like he was used to cleaning up after Harlan's storms. I waited until Lucia stepped away to touch up her makeup. I followed her to the bridal suite. She stood at the vanity, dabbing under her eyes, careful not to smear anything. "I'm fine, Mom," she said before I could open my mouth. Her voice cracked halfway through the word fine. She didn't turn around. I walked over slowly. Her hands were shaking. "He didn't mean it," she added. But she didn't believe it, not really. "Has he said things like that before?" I asked gently. Lucia hesitated. "He doesn't like how Evan left the family business. He says things, jokes. I don't know." She sounded tired, like she'd rehearsed how to excuse someone else's behavior. I stood there looking at my daughter dressed in white, lip-trembling eyes, glassy. She was not walking into a marriage. She was walking into a hierarchy. And she was already learning how to disappear inside it. She picked up her bouquet again, staring at her reflection. "Let's go back out," she whispered. I opened the door for her, but I stayed back a moment. That was when I remembered what I'd seen outside the steakhouse 2 nights earlier. 2 nights before the wedding, I stood outside a steakhouse waiting for my takeout. Harlan was there too, across the parking lot. I saw him before he saw me. He held the door open for a woman, tall in a navy pantsuit, and she leaned in, kissed him lightly on the cheek. A little girl trailed behind her, about 8 curls bouncing. As they walked inside, she tugged his sleeve and chirped, "Come on, Dad." He didn't correct her, just smiled and followed them in. At the time, I told myself it was nothing. Maybe a cousin. Maybe an old friend's daughter. But now, watching Lucia smile through gritted teeth while Harlan circles this wedding like he owns it, that memory slides back into place with a new edge. Everything he's done this weekend feels less like celebration and more like staking a claim. He paid for the venue. He chose the menu. He even rearranged the seating chart the morning of moving my name to a corner while placing his golf buddies front and center. I tried to bring it up gently. Later in the evening, I asked Evan if everything was okay between his parents. He looked at me like I'd opened the wrong door. "There's just history," he mumbled, then changed the subject before I could press. That night, Lucia came to my room. She sat on the edge of the bed and pulled at the hem of her sleeve like it was coming apart. "He doesn't think we're enough," she whispered. "I don't know what we're supposed to prove." I didn't say anything. There was nothing to say that would untangle the knot in her chest. I just held her hand. She fell asleep like that, sitting up, her fingers still curled around mine. I stayed awake for hours, staring at the ceiling, hearing that little girl's voice again. "Come on, Dad." By morning, I couldn't let it go. I needed to know who she was and what else Harlan was hiding. I didn't tell anyone what I was doing. Not Lucia, not even my sister who'd flown in for the wedding. I just started small county records, real estate databases, online photos. The first thing that stood out was the addresses. Harlan's home with Evan's mother was listed, of course. But there was another property registered under a trust name that traced back to him through 3 layers. A townhouse 2 cities over. Social media showed gaps. Thanksgivings where only Lucia's side posted photos, no Harlan. Christmas mornings where Evan's mother stood by the tree alone. Evan never commented, just liked the posts. Always polite, always distant. I found a business registry too. Consulting, independent. Lots of travel. Nothing unusual unless you were looking for it. Through an old friend of mine who used to work at the same firm, I tracked down a colleague of Harlan's. Over the phone, the man said, "Harlan's a good guy, just private. Travels a lot. Keeps things compartmentalized." That word, it sat heavy with me. I ended the call and stared out the window of the hotel room, watching wind lift dust from the parking lot. I didn't want to plant suspicion in Lucia's heart on her wedding weekend. I wanted her to feel whole, seen, loved, but the truth was already at the edge of the frame. Later that afternoon, I mentioned Harlan's behavior to Lucia, how he spoke to Evan, to the servers, even to her. She didn't disagree. She just said Evan's tired. He's been dealing with it his whole life. I don't want to make it worse. That's when I saw it, the quiet pact she'd made with herself. If she absorbed enough, maybe Evan wouldn't have to. By the time the reception speeches began, Lucia's eyes were rimmed pink. She kept her chin lifted, trying to look composed, but the strain pulled at every line in her face. One of her bridesmaids leaned close and murmured, "Just ignore him. It's your day." But words like that don't erase wounds. They only make them quieter. Evan stood behind Lucia with one hand on her shoulder, giving it these small, apologetic squeezes. He didn't turn toward his father. He didn't say a word. His silence wrapped around her like a thin blanket, warm for a second, but not enough to keep out the cold. I looked across the room, searching for Harlan. He was leaning back at his table, arms crossed, watching Lucia. Not with regret. Not with confusion. Watching the way a man watches a gamble, curious to see how it pays off. As if he wanted to see her break, to confirm some story he'd already written about her. When dinner ended, Lucia excused herself. I followed her down the hallway, lined with framed desert landscapes, until she slipped into the dressing room. She stood at the mirror, wiping the corner of her eye, careful not to smear too much makeup. "He talks like that all the time," she whispered. When I asked, "About Evan, about us?" She set the tissue down and took a breath that shuddered through her whole body. I've heard them fight. About money. About what looks respectable. About how Evan needs to stop disappointing him. The words came in pieces, each one heavier than the last. He says we should be grateful he offered to pay for the wedding. That we'd never manage something this polished. I felt something tighten in my chest. This wasn't generosity. It was ownership, dressed as kindness. Lucia stared at her reflection. Maybe he's right. Maybe we're not enough. That sentence cut deeper than anything Harlan had said. Because it wasn't his voice, it was hers, reshaped by him. I stepped beside her not to console, but to anchor her. I would not let her measure her worth by a man who only knew how to shrink others. And I knew then that this wedding was no longer about vows. It was about unveiling the truth I'd already begun to uncover. I couldn't stop hearing the girl's voice in my head. Come on, Dad. Her words clung to me like smoke. I hadn't imagined it. And I no longer believed she was anyone's niece. So I followed the trail, carefully, quietly. School directories weren't hard to search if you knew what to look for. In a town 30 minutes east, a PTA newsletter listed a girl with the same first name I'd overheard. Her last name was Knox. A second search pulled up an address that matched one of the properties tied to a trust I'd seen earlier. That's when the name Brielle Knox appeared. Not just once, but over and over. Property tax forms, community rosters, local event pages. A woman in her late 30s working in real estate, often photographed with a tall man, just out of frame or turned slightly away. But one image stopped me. A school fundraiser posted a girl with bright eyes and a messy ponytail standing beside Harlan, his hand resting on her shoulder. Same girl, same smile, same man. The date, Thanksgiving weekend. The same weekend, Evan's mother had posted a solo photo of a turkey with the caption, "Just me and the bird this year." I sat back and stared at the screen. I wasn't looking at coincidence. I was looking at a secret life, one threaded through quiet transactions and long absences. Further digging confirmed it. Brielle Knox was the registered agent on an LLC for a development company. The listed manager, Harlan Sutter. They shared a billing address for a phone plan tucked inside a data package registered to the second home. Everything lined up. It didn't even require speculation anymore. He had a second family, a second daughter, another life. And yet he walked into this wedding like a king, loud, controlling, cruel, cutting my daughter down in front of 100 people, as if he were the only man in the room who mattered. I didn't know what I'd do with this truth yet, but I knew I wouldn't carry it alone. Not after what I saw in Lucia's face when she said she wasn't enough. I sat at the desk in my hotel room and printed everything. Screenshots of school websites. A picture of Harlan at the fundraiser with the girl beside him. Copies of property records, tax listings, and the business registry that tied his name to Brielle Knox. I didn't annotate or highlight. Just compiled. Clean, quiet truth. I placed it all in a simple folder, no label, no explanation, and tucked it into my purse. I didn't know if I'd use it. I didn't even rehearse what I'd say. I only knew that if the moment came, I wouldn't look away. When I stepped back into the ballroom, Harlan was already up by the stage. He held his glass like a scepter, scanning the room like he owned it. There was that same easy smile, like nothing in the world could catch him off guard. Lucia was at the edge of the dance floor, her smile soft but unfocused. The weight of the day had pulled at her posture. Evan stood next to her, still silent, still watching his father, like a student waiting for instructions. I stood near the backhand on the strap of my purse. I didn't want this. I didn't want to be the one to fracture the celebration. But it wasn't a celebration anymore. Not really. Not when the person who claimed to be generous spent the entire night diminishing everyone else. And this wasn't just about Harlan. It was about what Lucia would absorb if no one ever told her she deserved better. That's what cruelty does best. It counts on your silence to multiply. I looked at her and knew I could no longer pretend this was someone else's story. As Harlan raised his glass again and stepped toward the microphone, I moved forward. Not to confront. Not yet. Just to close the distance. Because if no one else was going to shield her from this, then I would. I reached into my bag and felt the edge of the folder as his voice filled the room again. Harlan lifted the microphone with one hand, swirling his glass with the other. The crowd quieted. This time he smiled wider. A different smile, measured performative. I guess I should say something heartfelt, he began. But Evan always said I wasn't much for sentiment, especially when he told me what he made as a public architect. The crowd chuckled. And Lucia, well, she's always been so optimistic. Sweet girl. Believes in things. I saw it happen in real time. Lucia's face faltered. Not just the smile slipping, but everything soft in her crumpling. Evan looked down, face flushed, his hand twitching at his side, but never rising. And me, I didn't wait for the room to adjust. I stepped forward. Harlan, I said gently, my voice carrying without force. May I? He turned, startled. A few heads turned too. I didn't take the mic. I didn't need to. I stood beside him and said calmly, evenly, I've been quiet all evening, but I think if we're going to speak about family, we should speak in full. I opened the folder and took out the photo. Harlan and the little girl at the fundraiser. I held it where he could see. Then the registry printout, the property listing, the school roster. I wasn't angry. I wasn't asking permission. I was simply laying facts down one by one, like setting a table. Harlan's expression changed, not outrage, but recognition. He knew what this was. He just hadn't expected it here. From the corner of my eye, I saw his wife Evan's mother set her wine glass down and walk out without a word. Evan stood frozen, his lips parted like he was trying to breathe through water. Lucia didn't say anything. She didn't have to. Her shoulders dropped not in shame, but in release, as if she had been carrying a story no one else was willing to name. The room was still, not hostile, just stunned, like everyone had witnessed something both terrible and necessary. I stepped back without flourish, folded the folder closed, and returned to my seat. And when I looked up again, Lucia was walking toward me. The music never resumed. After my words, after the documents were laid bare, no one reached for the microphone again. Guests lingered in uncertain pockets, murmuring behind napkins, offering half-hearted hugs as they slipped out early. The celebration dissolved in quiet. No accusations, no raised voices, just a gentle collapse. I watched Evan approach Lucia in the corner of the room. They didn't touch at first. He said something I couldn't hear, but his face was pale, his shoulders lowered. Later, Lucia told me his words. I knew something was wrong. I didn't know everything, but I was afraid of what I'd find if I looked too close. And you didn't think to warn me, she'd asked, not with anger, just exhaustion. I didn't want to make it real, he replied. She didn't cry. She just said, then I can't be the one to keep pretending. They called off the remainder of the night. No first dance, no cake, no farewell line. The reception hall emptied with slow grace, like a room forgetting its purpose. That night, Lucia knocked on my hotel door but didn't come in. Instead, we sat in the hallway, outside our backs, against the wallpapered wall, the carpet quiet beneath our feet. I don't know if today ruined everything, she whispered, or saved me from something worse. I didn't rush to answer. Then I said, beginnings and endings feel the same at first. Time's the only one who tells you which you survived. We stayed there until the hallway lights dimmed. By morning, she told Evan she needed space. No legal annulment, no drama. Just distance. Clarity. He didn't fight her on it. He nodded, held her hand a moment too long, and left with his mother. Lucia didn't cry. She didn't explain anything to the world. She just packed her bag and walked out with me into the Santa Fe sunlight that already felt different. She didn't say where she wanted to go, only that she couldn't go back. So we started driving. It's quiet now. Not empty, just still in a way that lets things settle. Lucia found a small place tucked near the edge of the foothills just outside town. Nothing fancy. A porch with 2 chairs, a kitchen, just big enough for one person to move without bumping into themselves. She wakes early, works steady hours, cooks for herself. Sometimes she brings leftovers to her neighbor who lives alone. She and Evan speak gently. A few texts now and then, a phone call last week. No blame, no clinging. Just the careful language of people learning how to respect what remains without needing it to become something again. Harlan left the state a month after the wedding. Discreet separation, the family said. No drama, no announcements, just a quiet exit that finally gave everyone room to breathe. I visit Lucia most weekends. I bring peaches when they're in season soup, when she's too tired to cook. We sit on the porch, sometimes talking, sometimes letting the silence carry us. She doesn't explain how she's feeling anymore. She doesn't have to. One afternoon, she leaned back in her chair and said, "I didn't realize how much space someone else's voice took up in my life. I understood more than she knew. For years, I had mistaken survival for peace. Had taught myself to speak around other people's comfort. Sometimes I said, you only hear yourself clearly once the noise is gone." She nodded and smiled. Not wide, not forced, just real. She's not broken. She's rearranging. Finding the corners of herself again, choosing what to keep, what to let go. Her life is quieter now, but it's hers. On her fridge hangs a small note in her handwriting. You don't owe anyone the version of you they prefer. She reads it every morning. And when I leave on Sundays, I don't worry anymore. She's not rebuilding from ruin, she's building from truth. Last weekend, she asked if I wanted to help her paint the porch. I said yes. She handed me a brush, and we worked in comfortable silent sunlight, warming the steps as we moved side by side.